Welcome to Distribution Talk with Jason Vader, the show where we dive into the stories, struggles, and solutions from business owners and thought leaders in the wholesale distribution market. Hey friends, Jason here. In this episode, I had a chance to speak with my long-term associate, Marshall Jones. You know, he has been working with the distribution team now for a lot of years, and he and I have known each other for, it's getting close to 30 years now. But anyhow, we decided to take a little time and talk about what he has been working on and focusing on lately, and that is helping distributors sell their companies and walk them through that process. And it's definitely a daunting process. There's a lot of complication to it, a lot more than I think most people realize when they're considering that, what is my exit strategy in this, in their entity, in their life's work for that matter. And so, Marshall just recently completed a transaction for one of our clients, and, he shared some of the things he took away from it and really trying to share what should be the expectations and then how can he help. I mean, let's just face it, going into these, transactions by yourself, it can be an incredibly daunting task. And having that advisor who's been there before is really a very reassuring way to get the most for the transaction, but also, establish trust. And he talks a lot about trust in these relationships. So anyway, we thought it'd be great to share that with our audience. I hope you enjoy the show, and I always love listening to Marshall's take on these things. So hope you enjoy it. This episode is brought to you by my friends at Moblico. Your customers and employees spend 30% of their waking day on their mobile devices. From custom mobile apps to robust mobile messaging solutions, Moblico provides the most comprehensive end-to-end mobile communication and outbound marketing solution to the wholesale distribution industry. In a recent conversation with someone using their Beacon technology, she described sending an instant request for a Google review after someone visited the showroom. Even better, what do you want to tell customers when they enter that showroom? This is the power of mobile communication. If you've been curious about how mobile technology can help your company or are looking to upgrade your current solution, check out what Moblico has to offer at www.moblicosolutions.com. That's MOBLICO solutions.com. And be sure to let them know you heard about them on the Distribution Talk podcast. Well, hey, Marshall, welcome back to Distribution Talk. It's been a little while since I've had you. We've had you on the show and to talk a little bit, but always great to get your insights.
Thrilled to be back.
It is fun because, you and I talk, obviously, on a regular basis about the things that you're, working on and the different things we're doing in the company. But, this one, I think this is one that we really wanted to share with the audience, and
yes.
Hey, this is something unique and different and kind of exciting.
Yeah, it kind of came out of the blue. It was
Right.
Not something that we were really trying to focus on or position ourselves with, but we're very fortunate to have a strong relationship with one of our coaching clients. And he reached out and he knew my background and knew that I had kind of been through some transactions in the past, both on the buying and selling side. And he had a very close friend in the industry that was in need of some help in selling their business and reached out to me to see if it might be a good fit. And I had couple really strong conversations with the family at the front end, and we went down that journey together. So we're really excited that it went so well for our client, and it's something that, as you and I've had one of our many conversations, we decided this is something that really might be valuable for a lot of the folks that we work with.
Well, I think as you and I grew up in the business, we met people along the way that, would come to the kind of near the end of their career and didn't really have a succession plan in place or something like that. And it's like, man, I need to get value out of my life's work here. I need to get something out of this.
Yeah.
I haven't planned ahead much and, really gotten ready for this event. And then life kind of kicks you sometimes, and all of a sudden you're like, man, I really need to move this entity. I need to change, something here. And so, but yes, you ran across, you had our good client, and he shared this with you. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of maybe walk us through, some of the big things.
Sure.
What are the things that you ran into? And maybe then again, we'll talk about some advice.
Absolutely. So you bring up good points as far as succession plans. And I know that a lot of the folks that we work with are part of family businesses and that they, have been working towards developing the next generation within their company.
Sure.
But sometimes there just isn't the right person to do that, or perhaps if there's multiple family members in one generation, that really need the cash from a transaction in order to be able to kind of continue their lifestyle past a sale, that trying to find one individual in the next generation that will kind of be burdened with that purchase price is difficult. And I think also we've got a lot of our customers out there, Jason, that are our clients that have dealt with a tremendous amount of upheaval over the last 4 or 5 years, from COVID to supply chain, and then a lack of being able to find young talent to bring into their organization. So their group is getting older, and that gives folk a shorter runway to dispose of the business within, to try to kind of sell it internally, maybe to a management team or something like that. So kind of some of the historical ways that you touched on that we saw folks transition their businesses that remained basically kind of these small family businesses, they've just been tougher to do over the last 4 or 5 years. And I really don't see that getting easier.
I don't either.
Yeah. I think that as we look at a lot of senior management teams, these folks have kind of grown up together. They've worked together for 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And they're all really, kind of approaching the end of their careers together, which makes it very difficult to transition in a traditional way. And I think that opens the doors to selling to outsiders, which is a very daunting challenge. You get very adept at dealing with customers, dealing with suppliers, dealing with, kind of your service providers along the way. You understand distribution, how to buy and sell, whether it was for us nuts and bolts and tools and fasteners or HVAC equipment or whatever it might be out there. And, when it comes to selling your business, it's a one-time deal. It's a one-shot opportunity. And there is so much unknown about it. Most folks that you're even friends with in the industry are bound up by non-disclosure agreements that when they sell their business, they can't really talk about all the details of it. And to be candid with you, this really was the first in-depth transaction where I was, in the weeds for hundreds of hours over the last few months. And it brought back some kind of PTSD from the sale of my business almost a dozen years ago. It's a stressful time. It's you don't really want to talk about, some of the mistakes you made with your kind of friends in the industry. You're also, if you do sell your business, you're generally kind of moved out of the industry very quickly for the new buyers to take possession of your business, and they don't really want kind of the conflict that comes from you still being around. So you're somewhat put out, with a non-compete and a non-disclosure agreement, and you aren't available to share your stories. So what I'm getting at is the ones that remain, the folks out there, they just really aren't made aware of what all is involved. And it's a deep process. It's a difficult process. It's something that you don't get trained on. There's really not a business course that you can take on how do you effectively sell your business.
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of business brokers out there that offer, luncheons. Then they'll bring you in and they'll show you their shiny presentation on how they go about selling a business. But it's really not enough to fully immerse yourself in and understand just how challenging it's going to be along that path. It is hard work. It is without a doubt the hardest part of your business ownership arc is the sale of the business for so many reasons.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think, and again, watching you go through this, I noticed that I saw this and I've seen other transactions that you're right. It is so hard. I remember, one client when he was selling his business, as a coaching client, and, really, really happy for how that was coming together. But he said he worked harder in the last 2 months than he had in the 5 years of ownership of this thing. It was just digging up financials, doing all of these things that, frankly, he wasn't really prepared. This offer came rolling at him and he asked me and I said, well, that's a lot of money. I think, I think you ought to take this thing.
Sure.
But the amount of work required to take this thing was pretty daunting.
Yeah. And the type of work, and obviously the vast majority of purchasers have multiple transactions under their belt.
Yes.
So they've got the experience. As I was reading the purchase sale agreement for the first time on this particular transaction, I could almost look paragraph by paragraph and identify issues that had happened in the past for this acquirer that they had to kind of paper up moving forward. So they have all of these protections built into their process because they've gone through this process. They've been struck in the head with the 2x4, as you eloquently often put, many times. And, they've learned, just basically how to protect themselves. And this is not always a synergistic opportunity. There is a winner and a loser typically in these kind of transactions. And you just have to, as the seller, be prepared to work very hard to make sure that every concession that you make along the way doesn't diminish the value that you're receiving for the business or put you in jeopardy in the future. Mm-hmm. And that's really what a lot of it's about. In preparing for this call, you and I talked a little bit about what are some of the takeaways that you had, and we'll get into lessons learned. But I would say that the biggest reminder in this, and I didn't really see it when I sold my business almost a dozen years ago now, was that the biggest component is trust. Mm-hmm. And trust is, what lubricates every day's business transactions. I mean, you trust that you're going to get paid on your AR, and you trust that the material is going to work to do whatever you've told it that it's going to do. Your customer trusts in that. You trust your suppliers to ship to you. I mean, all this trust is what lubricates our day-to-day business. But there is a whole nother level of it when it comes to selling an entity. And generally, the buyers and the sellers have not known each other for a very long period of time, especially when it comes to how the business is run and the way that the business is operated. So the buyers are really working hard in a very short period of time, which we call due diligence, to determine, can we trust, can we believe what we're being told? And that is something that, a lot of times as a seller, you just assume that you're going to be trusted. You trust the other side in most transactions that you do during the day. And I'm not saying you're naive. I'm just saying that we all have to have trust in order for our days to accomplish what we're setting out to do.
Sure.
There's this whole other level of trust when it comes to one of these transactions. And it's challenging because it creates a lot of ill will. You just feel like you're being put on the defensive. You're being, asked to produce things that you're telling someone is true, but
you have to have proof.
You need to have ways to verify it.
Yeah.
You have to prove it out.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're trying to trust that they're actually going to carry through with what they're telling you. It's going to happen. The buyer is trusting that you will actually, at the finish line, give them the keys to the building, kind of a thing, that you're willing to give up your baby at the end of this process. So the value of trust, it's something that, should be super obvious, but I tell you, it really was incredible to watch it as close as I was allowed to be to this transaction, but still being an outsider to see just how important that it is along the way and how much really the value that I was able to bring into this situation by helping to build some trust along the way. And that was something that I wish, looking back at my transaction, that I had someone that could have been there to help explain to me that it's not a personal situation. It's not something that they're really doubting me or distrusting me, but that it's just, part of the nature of this process. And at the same time, look for ways that we can find evidence that we can trust them to do what they're saying. So the ability to have someone helping you develop that, create that along the way, I think would be so valuable.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on the personal nature. And if you think about, your life's work in this case, again, you and I started in these companies at a very, very young age. And how can it not be personal when somebody says, well, prove that you're saying what you're saying? It's like, well, wait a minute. I've been here and I have run this business with integrity for a very long time. And you're now asking me to prove that I am someone of integrity. And that could be a little off-putting.
Yeah. And prove to it. And simultaneously, as the seller, you realize this is another one of the takeaways. And fortunately, I learned this from my father very early on, and that I'd seen it often in business, that the old adage, This is a really old adage. So most of your listeners probably weren't even around when this was a regular old adage, but this is a super old adage now. But loose lips do sink ships.
Oh,
and so we're doing all of this activity under the cover of, not allowing the employees, the customers, and the suppliers to know what is happening. I mean, you really run the risk, and I saw this super firsthand in this particular transaction. If the cat is out of the bag too early, there will be no bag left at the end of the transaction.
Right.
So you really have to protect yourself. And there again, having an outsider, I was fortunate. I had a very small satellite corporate office that we could really kind of run all of my due diligence process through.
Right.
When I sold my business, most people don't have that luxury. Their biggest branch is connected to their headquarters. And if they've got 100 people, 80 of them might be in that one building.
Right.
So you can't really parade, a bunch of people through without kind of word getting out.
And they may be competitors, so they could be recognized pretty simply, pretty quickly.
Absolutely. So kind of keeping things quiet, having somebody that can help handle the vast majority of the conversations, the meetings, those kind of things, brings a lot of value to that seller that is looking for, how do I create this trusting relationship? How do I provide the information that they need? Mm-hmm. How do I get my questions answered? And yet, how do we do this without letting our stakeholders...
With discretion,
Yeah, absolutely. With tremendous amount of discretion. So those are two big takeaways from kind of being so close to this transaction along the way.
This episode of Distribution Talk is sponsored by InSQL Distribution Software. InSQL is a fully functional distribution-based software package, and these folks do it very well at a price point many smaller distributors can afford. Another thing I like about this company is they do it all in-house. They take on these applications and build them into the platform using state-of-the-art Microsoft technology. No third-party bolt-ons for them. This is important because when you need technical assistance, they are the single point of contact. If you're ready to step up to a fully loaded, scalable distribution package at an affordable price, look no further than InSQL Distribution Software at www.insql.com. That's INXSQL.com. Back when you and I were on the board of staff, hate to say that, 20 plus years ago now.
A big plus, I'm afraid.
Yes, a big plus. I remember a gentleman took me aside, and he was in his mid 60s at the time. And he said, "Hey, do you know anybody who would want to buy my business?" And this always just kind of stuck in my mind. And I kind of knew how this gentleman ran the business, that he was the lead salesperson for the company. And, all things went through him. There was really not a whole lot of responsibility delegation, things like that. I remember looking at him and saying, well, what exactly is somebody buying here? It was something that we talked about, but I think it was one of those aha moments that, when that owner is so deeply integrated into the weeds in the day-to-day operation of a business, it's very difficult for a seller to look at that and say, well, if you go, what do I got?
Right.
And that was just this really interesting aha moment for me. Yeah. But, I'm sure you ran into this.
Yeah. And not in this most recent transaction as much as some of the things that I've experienced over the last 10, 12 years, consulting in this space. But you're exactly right. There's got to be a business for the buyer to buy, as opposed to just, an individual and the little infrastructure built around the individual. And I think you and I both do a good job in our coaching side of our practice of, if we've got someone that is in that gentleman's situation and he's looking for, how do I create an exit? And I've built this cocoon around me, and how do we begin to kind of take it apart? And certainly it depends on your time frame, your horizon, how much distance there is between now and the point where you need to or want to sell. And we can certainly work on coaching strategies to be able to help folks move into a position where they can exit their business that way. The reality is that not every buyer wants the owner to exit immediately.
Correct.
And in situations like those, there just would be a longer transition plan with milestones along the way. And with those milestones, certain components of the sale would trigger and some of the payments would be made, those kind of things. Whereas if the seller wanted to exit immediately and the buyer looked at the company and saw that we were really better off to have the buyer take possession fully, not have much of a transitional period, then I think that you just have to have that structure in place like you're talking about. How do you have them unconnected? And I think that that's what a lot of the folks probably listening to the podcast today is saying, I'm interested in selling my business. If they built a business that they are somewhat detached from, they're still in it every day. They're still working really hard every day and a part of the business, but that they are disconnected enough from kind of every transaction that happens during the course of the day, then, I think they are in a position to therefore be able to exit the business immediately upon the sale of it. And that's really, I think, in everybody's best interest if possible, because the buyer wants to set the new direction. And often with an owner there, I was fortunate when I sold my business, they hired everybody but me.
Yeah.
This transaction that I was just a part of, they hired everyone except the owners. And that, that was ideal for everybody involved. It gave great new opportunities for the prior employees. It allowed the sellers to, move off and do something new. And the buyers were given the freedom to be able to come in and set this new direction and bring their culture in, as opposed to having to kind of fight that component of a transaction. So whether you stay in the business and work through or exit immediately, I think there's a path either way. But I definitely think that if your desire is to exit the business, then you really have to coach it, and we need to kind of work with them to make sure that they've got that distance and separation.
Well, and I agree, and I think that's something that I keep thinking about. Whenever I work with a private, coaching client, that someday down the line that you want this entity to be sellable, and if you are in the weeds, I feel like it's more difficult. That's all I'm going to say. And I had a conversation with somebody I think it was this week, about the similarities to preparing your business and having your home ready for sale at all times,
Right.
Because at the end of, and this is in every home I have sold over the years, there's that, 2 months of, I've got to get every contractor in here. I've got to get everything cleaned up, the things I should have been doing all along.
Yeah.
And I've got this mad rush to clean it up. And I feel like that is actually can be, a similarity in getting ready for a transaction, that there are a lot of things that you should have done along the way.
Absolutely. And if we're given a long runway and the ability to work with the client, I think we can really help folks, just as a good realtor would help folks, pick out some very generic carpet and some generic wall, paint colors or whatever that are going to be helpful in the transaction. We can do some of those basic things with them as well. But I will say this, that having come off of a situation where time was of the essence for the seller.
Yes.
That you don't have to wait.
Right.
And I would also say you'll never get to the point where it's 100% perfect. Yeah. Even when you try to do that for your house, if you've got a dog or kids, it's going to get dirty between the time you put that new carpet in and the time that the first showing happens. So, I think the same thing goes with your own business. You're going to have, as soon as you put the new facade on, there's going to be something that happens along the way. So if you're at a point where selling it is the right move for you, we can market any business immediately. It does not have to be, completely squared away to be sold. I just don't want folks to think that if they're in a difficult time, whether it's family health issues or succession challenges or employee, some key employees leave, and they just say, instead of rebuilding this whole thing and getting it all shiny and new again, the right move for us is to exit the business. Well, you may take a little bit of a reduction in price as a result of not having all of these things as spruced up as possible.
Yeah.
But, just how much is it going to cost you to get all of these things into place? And in the risk of what happens between now and that point somewhere in the future where I feel like I've got it all shiny and new again, what other things can happen between now and then? And with each month or year that goes by that you don't market the business, are you really positioning yourselves to get more value for it in the future, or take what you can get today and start doing something new with it, or enjoying your retirement or whatever that next phase for you is going to be?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. That yes, any business is marketable.
Yeah.
It's sellable. It's just, kind of in what condition it is at the time.
Right. Right.
And that was something that you helped tremendously with this individual.
Yeah. And I think that, we made do with whatever we had. I think that's something that an advisor can help you with, and ultimately help the buyer get comfortable with where the seller is, or the list of buyers, the potential buyers, get comfortable and move the process forward, where sometimes there might be sticking moments if you're having to create things that you historically have not created, financials, those kind of things that a particular set of buyers or potential buyers are looking for. So I think that there's some value in having someone that can be that advisor role to kind of help you get through, no matter where you are. If you're all cleaned up and ready to go, the advisory kind of getting themselves into your business and making sure that you got a real clear picture of the potential that you have. Or if you're just saying, we've got to go now, that we can help regardless of that type of a situation. But the steps along the way are really going to be pretty much the same. We spend time, you on the coaching and consulting side and myself doing the same, just really getting a deep understanding of the business and its potential. And I think this is what separates us as we go down this road. And I going to kind of spearhead this for us, is that we are not business brokers, and we don't intend to become business brokers. That's not our game. That's not what we're trying to be. We would not feel comfortable selling a group of med spas or chicken restaurants. That's not what we do. If the local gym down the corner wants to sell itself, they would not call us. What we've honed our knowledge around is industrial distribution, and really specifically from the distributor's perspective. I don't think we would be all that great at selling a rep agency or a small manufacturer, but what we know is we know how distributors work. We know how the financials work for distributors. We know the basic, day in, day out things around inventory and AR and how to value those things and how the market's going to perceive them. We're going to kind of have some expectations of where the market would expect you to be, and abilities to have processes and those kind of things in this particular space, your accuracy, those kind of things. That really gives us an advantage over someone interested in selling their business, going out to the guy that sells the gym down the street, or that
traditional business broker.
Exactly. In our particular space. I mean, I think that the seller does not have to educate us on what their business is all about. I mean, we're going to spend time learning the intricacies and the nuances of their business, but we're going to bring a basic understanding that's just not present with a traditional business broker.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah. And I think that what the business broker's model is they're going to then develop a book, a content, kind of this presentation of projections and all kinds of things. And it's all going to be based on historical financial information, and they're going to have lots of shiny pictures and those kind of things. I don't know how valuable the buyers really see that. I mean, they really want to know, where is the business functioning at the moment, and help us understand what it's got going for it, that we can then leverage and put our processes and systems into place to be able to grow it. So when it comes to strategic buyers, I think we really have the ability to kind of manage that conversation very well. We can spot where the opportunities are. And when it comes to financial buyers, the other large group of potential acquirers out there, I think we can, paint a picture for them that's going to resonate as well. And I really believe that even though business brokers, have big Rolodexes of companies that are out there buying businesses, that when it comes to identifying and approaching the buyers in a particular space, we really can work with that seller to identify who those folks are. I mean, obviously in today's M&A environment, people are getting knocked on the door, they're getting phone calls from lots of different folks. We can certainly follow up on all of those very confidentially for the seller. We can go out and look at the players in the space, the local competitors, the national competitors. We can start very discreet conversations with all of them before anybody's name is mentioned, before anybody looks at an area code and says, oh, it must be so-and-so. We can kind of get to a non-disclosure, which also, our non-disclosure has a non-solicitation. One of the things that I feel like most sellers are afraid of is if I start a conversation with the big gorilla in my space, that they're going to learn a lot about my stuff and then they're going to come take all my employees away from me.
Right. They're going to do a greenfield startup right in your neighborhood and say, you know what, I'm just going to take this.
Exactly. So what we do is we try to protect that early on by saying, yeah, we're going to give you access to this information to this particular company, but for a period of a year, you're not going to touch any of their employees afterwards. I think that's a very reassuring thing for the seller. And the reality is that most big buyers, they don't really want to start a greenfield. They want to acquire a company.
Right.
And, that's not something that's hard for them to overcome in the conversation either, is this idea that we're not going to take folks from their company. So we, on behalf of our client, the seller, will go out there and approach these buyers, whether they are local competitors, national competitors. They may even be customers.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of companies that we work with that their customers are trying to get a little bit more vertical and, kind of work their way up into the chain. That may be suppliers.
Maybe a supplier. I was just going to say that's not uncommon. Yeah.
Exactly. We just saw a huge deal in the construction supply space where a big forming manufacturer was acquired by one of the country's largest construction supply dealers. So there's all kinds of different looks and feels to where that buyer may come from than what I think a traditional distributor thinks of as when they say, well, we're going to go sell our business. It's either going to be to 1, 2, or 3.
Yes.
There could be 30 or 40 people out there. And I don't know that we have to talk to that many. The key is, though, and this is where we and business brokers both agree, you got to have at least 2 or 3 people in the conversation.
Sure.
The vast majority of our clients that we've seen get sold over the years, they've had one conversation.
Yeah.
Somebody comes to them, they say, we want to buy their business. They give them a number. They say, yeah, it's good. Then they go through the torture of selling it for 90 days or so, maybe even longer. Problems come up. They get to the other side and they don't really know whether they got a good deal or not. And the only way you really know if you got a good deal is if you can have 2 or 3 companies all kind of creating a market for your business. And I think that's where it is extraordinarily difficult for a distributor's owner to be able to manage. It's hard enough, putting myself back in my sale. It was hard enough for me to manage the conversation with one buyer. To have tried to do that simultaneously with 3 or 4 companies would have just been impossible. So, I think that that's really where an advisor coming in can manage these conversations. Basically I had folders going, virtual folders going for multiple potential acquirers and managing those conversations, keeping them engaged, keeping them aware. And when we did settle on, when we finally got to an offer that made sense for the seller, to keep those others in the wings without violating the exclusivity that comes, when you go under a letter of intent with the company that you're set to sell to. So, we didn't violate any of those terms, but those companies were still out there. If something did go south in our negotiations with the lead acquirer, we would need to sell that business still. There's still that desire to sell that business. So we need to be able to resurrect a relationship very quickly. And I think that there again, having an advisor is so much easier than if you're trying to do this of kind of keeping these people in the wings. I don't hear a lot about people, that are having a conversation with one company. It fizzles, they start something back with another company. It's so hard to keep those kinds of relationships intact in effect through the process. But that's what we were able to do in this most recent situation, which I think helped keep the initial acquirer, the one that we went under LOI with, kind of focused on let's get to the end of this deal.
Right. Let's get to the finish line because there are others in the game.
Exactly. Yeah. And that negotiation, and just so that folks know that between the time that LOI, the letter of intent, is created and signed off by both parties, and that's generally just 2 or 3 pages, and the time that we close, I would say a best practice is somewhere between 30 and 60 days. You really want to hustle to get that done just as quickly as possible. Now, it may take months and months to get to the LOI. That's all kind of under the radar. You may not have anything happen for 2 or 3 weeks, while people are digesting what they've gotten. And then they're going to come back and say, hey, can we get this? And somebody else is going to say, well, we're not as interested as we were, but keep us in mind. Or, you might be able to bring somebody new into the equation during those 4 or 5 months. But then when the LOI hits, it is controlled chaos
it's game on.
for 45 days or so.
Yeah.
And it's just intense. And at some point along those 45 days, I would say the later you can go, the better. You will bring other employees into the conversation. You'll start to introduce the acquirer to some of the key employees, and then eventually to everybody. You'll have to do things like an inventory count. If inventory is a big part of your business, the acquirer is going to want to know that is accurate and true. They're going to have third party come in and help you with that. And so there's all kinds of things that go along that path, and we're happy to kind of talk through this cycle with anybody, so that they'll understand exactly what's there. But that's kind of the structure and some of the things that I took away from it.
Yeah. Marshall, and I'm glad that was a good segue there. So what are kind of the first steps for someone to, get a hold of the distribution team, and then ultimately you, because you're really heading up this side of the practice.
Yeah.
So
I would say if they know you directly, by all means, contact you, have that conversation before they even come to me. And you would be the one to really help them understand what we'll be able to try to do and accomplish. And then you can connect me to them. If they're new to the distribution team or they've had some experience with me in the past, by all means, reach out to me directly. My information is on the distribution team's website. I'm sure you put it in the show notes here.
I will.
And just reach out, and we'll start with a short phone call or a Zoom call to just really get a feel for where you are in the process. Maybe you've been approached and you think maybe now is the time, but you've always known that if you are approached, you really should get a couple of people to look at it instead of just one. And that's absolutely great advice. And we can help, manage that process. The next piece that would happen is that we would get under an agreement and you would send some financials to us so that we can kind of help you understand where you're at. And I would say to anybody that if there's one thing that they can do is really start to work on creating good financials, make sure that they're done timely. I'll beat that drum over and over with folks as we kind of walk through the process, but that is a key component of it.
Yeah.
And that goes back to that trust.
Yeah.
It goes back to the trust. If you've got great financials that are really accurate and easy to understand, the trust is immediately there. If you don't, then you just need to have somebody kind of work to help build that over time with your potential acquirer.
Nice. Well, hey, Marshall, I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk through, especially this most recent transaction, but then really, kind of putting some folks at ease, that, hey, there are people to help you through this, that understand what you do for a living. I think that's one of the key takeaways there. So,
yeah, I tell you what, it was so rewarding for me to be a part of the process, to help folks that part of family business, second generation family business that really needed to exit. And, we're kind of at a loss for what do they do next. It was wonderful to be a part of getting them across the finish line. We've gotten to know the acquirer really well over that period of time as well. It's fantastic to see where they're going to take the company. It's just such a win-win-win at the end. But along the way, you don't really feel that. You feel more it's a lot of hard work where having someone in an advisory role can really lubricate the process dramatically and help folks get to the other side.
Marshall, thanks for sharing that with us. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to, you need to be on more often. I think I need to get you more often because you run into all these fun stories that I run into as well. And, we're going to have to definitely get some more airtime for you in the future.
Always happy to. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, consider sharing with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to follow the show on your favorite podcast application. Links to sponsors, products, and services mentioned during this episode can be found in the show description area or at www.distributiontalk.com. Distribution Talk is edited and mixed by the brilliant team at the Creative Impostor Studios. This episode was brought to you by my company, the Distribution Team. We are a consulting services firm dedicated to helping wholesale distribution clients remove barriers to profitability, generate wealth, and achieve personal goals. To learn more about how we can help your company succeed, check us out at www.thedistributionteam.com. This episode is brought to you by my friends at Profit2. Clients have shared that the big thing that sets Profit2 apart is their approach. From the moment you meet the team at Profit2, you get a sense that they know their business and how to help you make improvements safely. What you don't get is an arrogance found in some competitive services. They know that you're an expert in your business, and they seek to help you be just a little bit better. We know resources are harder than ever to find, and with the barrage of price increases, adjusting to the changes is a massive and oftentimes manual challenge. If you want to discover hidden margin opportunities without being talked down to, learn more at www.profit2.com. That's profit with a number 2. And be sure to let them know you heard about them on the Distribution Talk podcast.